This video is sponsored by Bespoke Post. Free speech means getting to say whatever you want, whenever you want, on whatever platform you want, all while not wearing pants and using slurs that even your grandpa would have found distasteful, right? Or maybe, or not at all, because seriously, which one is it these days? Because I'm very confused. It seems like everyone is mad about free speech lately. And its supposed return came with Elon Musk's takeover of Twitter. You'll never make me call it X, that's a letter, not a name. And now TikTok might be banned in part for somehow being anti-free speech because it's owned by a Chinese company. But rarely are we stopping to ask, is free speech actually good? And you know what, screw it. While we're at it, is democracy overrated as well? Today, we're gonna get into this by talking about the state of free speech on the internet and the way it's helping to shape our democracy. I'll also talk about how ancient philosophy might have something to say about the current model of social media as a digital marketplace of ideas. But before we start, let's just affirm our commitment to free speech, okay? So before we dive in, let's all say something that we're only allowed to say because of free speech, no matter how heinous or problematic or f***ed up it is, okay? Ready? 1, 2, 3. Woo! That felt good. It feels good to get it out. Okay, let's begin with Elon Musk, a self-described free speech absolutist. Funny for me to read that line as someone who was banned from his platform for making a dumb joke. Okay, before we get into it, I want to give a shout out to this video sponsor, Bespoke Post. Summer is coming soon, and that means I'm gonna get to do a lot of my favorite summertime stuff, which is like hiking and camping and having a cold drink out on the porch on a warm day. And what better way to enjoy the outdoors than with Bespoke Post? Now, Bespoke Post is a monthly subscription service that sends you a new box of awesome curated goods from under-the-radar brands. It's free to join, and you can skip a month or cancel anytime. 90% of the products come from small brands, many of which are based right here in the US. Now, every month they introduce members to products ranging from outdoor gear to barware to kitchen goods and so much more, all based on the results of a preference quiz they fill out. Now, if for some reason you're not feeling the box you get, you can always swap it out for another one or just skip the month entirely for no charge because you only pay for what you want. And let's check out some of the stuff in their current boxes. Okay, so in the Switchback box, it comes with a rechargeable solar light you can use when you're outside, military compass, I know where I'm going, fire starter, a trifold camp shovel, and of course you always need a good, sturdy knife to have with you. And there's also the concentrate box, which I love because one of my favorite things in summer is a nice glass of cold brew. So, it comes with a cold brew coffee maker along with a concrete desk set and some Bolivar bitters, which add a little extra classy flavor to my coffee. Now, every box of Awesome has around $70 worth of goods inside, but this is the best part. They cost only a fraction of the value. And to get 20% off your first box of Awesome, click the link in the description and enter the code Wisecrack at checkout. Or you can just go to bespokepost.com/Wisecrack. And now I'm gonna use my compass to get back to the show. Now, after acquiring Twitter, Musk curbed content moderation, creating an anything goes environment.
I acquired X in order to preserve freedom of speech in America, the First Amendment.
Like a suburban Key Party, except it's all verified accounts sharing Andrew Tate memes. Because according to Rocket Man, if it's legal to say it, you should be able to say it on Twitter or, X. This commitment to freedom of speech comes with a side of revenge, as Musk has been punishing Disney after they dropped advertising on Twitter. Now, he's also promised to defend anyone discriminated against by Disney. Is currently backing Gina Carano in her quest to get back on The Mandalorian, a show which she says she doesn't care about, but is also suing to be back on. You make sense of that one. In 2023, Musk tweeted, or in his native parlance, X'd, if you were unfairly treated by your employer due to posting or liking something on this platform, we'll fund your legal bill, no limit. While this all-in approach to free speech might seem good, it embodies what writer Max Fisher calls a techno-libertarian ideal, one which frames content moderation as a bad thing. According to Fisher, author of The Chaos Machine, social media moguls like Musk tend to think that engagement equals value. More connection builds understanding. Free speech beats bad speech. A good guy with a gun beats a bad guy with a gun. I added that last one, and that line was sponsored by the NRA. Go to nra.org/wisecrack to get an error page, probably. Fisher argues that this brand of Silicon Valley free speech led to an inability to confront the Alex Jones problem. Because while Alex Jones said stuff like,
"These people are not frickin' humans, okay? Hillary Clinton is a goddamn demon,"
banning him is an admission that their vision of free speech might be flawed. At the time that we're filming this, Jones is still banned from YouTube, Facebook, and Apple, and currently owes the families of the Sandy Hook mass shooting victims $1.5 billion with defamation charges after using his platform to spread conspiracies. Anyway, the techno-libertarian ideal, which posits a vision of a digital haven of free speech, is connected to the idea of democracy, with social media serving as the proverbial town square where folks get together to debate important ideas, where everyone is welcome to join the conversation. But the question remains whether or not this town square model works. Does it create the space for presenting and debating ideas in a communal fashion, our own sort of Socratic dialogue? Or does it instead descend into a no-holds-barred cage match of ideas where those with more followers use their clout to dominate the weak? It's important to note that a town square doesn't need to be a lawless zone with no rules, like the Outback Steakhouse. I mean, even public parks have rules. For example, in Fresno, California, it's illegal to annoy a lizard in a park. The average person doesn't want to have dinner at a restaurant where anything goes. Except for the freaks that fetishize Australian culture and go to that zone of chaos known as the Outback Steakhouse. Now, when you go to the bar with your friends, right, you're probably trying to relax and have a good time, get a little buzz on. But if someone with a Nazi neck tattoo shows up, they're probably going to be asked to leave. And when this happens, it's usually not interpreted as anti-free speech, but anti-hate speech. And even the sketchiest digital dive bars like 4chan have foundational rules, including ones against doxing. But the existence of rules doesn't necessarily mean that these are good models to begin with. And we still need to step back and ask if we want our society, and by proxy democracy, to be largely dependent on digital spaces with the spirit of an Australian steakhouse. So let's leave our chaotic world of social platforms and algorithmic data for now and jump back to a time where men wore robes, wine flowed freely, and you could be sentenced to death for doing too much philosophy. Because for some of the most important philosophers ever, democracy and free speech on their own were a little problematic and maybe even bad. Now, there's a pretty direct connection between free speech and democracy. Because to properly engage in the democratic process, we need the space to freely debate ideas so we can come to informed conclusions. And many of the biggest defenders of the right to free speech are also those most enthusiastic about the inherent sanctity of democracy.
The First Amendment was one of the reasons why I decided to come and live in America.
But while Western democracy often traces its roots back to Athenian democracy, Athens' most legendary philosopher is pretty critical of this idea. In the Republic, Plato's Socrates says that these and other kindred characteristics are proper to democracy, which is a charming form of government, full of variety and disorder, and dispensing a sort of equality to equals and unequals alike. Now, this might sound like he's saying equality is bad, but what he's really doing is pointing to the way in which those who seek wisdom and those who cravenly seek power end up with an equal influence in society. It's sort of like how the democracy on free speech-centric platforms makes it possible for a tenured professor in political theory to have less influence over political life than a guy named Derek T, who learned from another guy named Randy S over on Reddit that an Illuminati-style cabal is controlling elections. Now, this is what made Plato skeptical of democracy. Amy Pollard writes in an article entitled "Democracy is Sick," Plato had good cause to believe Athenian democracy was sick. As demonstrated in Book 1 of the Republic, Athenian citizens couldn't conceive of the good city, much less the good life, because they couldn't agree on a definition of justice, and were blinded by opinion and ignorance. The city had become sophistical, valuing slick rhetoric over truth. The city even executed his teacher Socrates. In short, discourse in a democracy can be easily polluted by those concerned more with influence and power than with truth. And when that happens, according to Plato, it leads to the rise of demagogues. These are political leaders who gain influence by appealing to desire and prejudice rather than rational argument. Which as an American, I can't even imagine a world where that would happen, but I don't know, I guess Plato knew some stuff. Now, in this sort of system, power and rhetoric matter more than truth and justice. And if appealing to people's base desires and fears and hatred gets you power, well, honey, that's what's gonna happen. As Plato writes in the Republic, tyranny naturally arises out of democracy. Now, as an alternative, he argues for a system in which we have philosopher kings who are responsible for the types of decisions that shape society. If you want to understand this better, and I'm really not joking here, imagine a Jedi, because that's a very good model for what he's getting at. To again quote the Republic, until philosophers are kings, or the kings and princes of this world have the spirit and power of philosophy, and political greatness and wisdom meet in one, and those commoner natures who pursue either to the exclusion of the other are compelled to stand aside, cities will never have rest from their evils. He's basically describing an oligarchy, except instead of being ruled by tech billionaires, we would be ruled by philosophers. These philosopher kings will have spent their whole lives concerned with understanding the nature of justice, and their voices would be the most valued. This is definitely not a democratic space of free speech where everyone gets equal stage time. Now, Plato's number one boy, Aristotle, had a more positive vision of democracy and thought participation in that system was vital to establishing a just society. Now, Matt Quotrup writes that according to Aristotle, virtuous citizens would elect an aristocracy who would justify their rule not by wealth or social status, but by their good judgment and reasoning. It's important to note that for Aristotle, to be virtuous is basically to think philosophically about all things in pursuit of justice. We actually talk about this in our video on Mean Girls, which is really just a video on Aristotle, so check that out if you never watched it. According to Quotrup, Aristotle believed that individuals deliberating together would have a greater combined knowledge than even the wisest person, i.e. collective deliberation is preferable to one philosopher king who spends all their time alone with their books. Now he goes on to cite a passage from Aristotle's commentary on the Constitution of Athens that defends collective deliberation. Quote, "It is possible that the many, when they come together, may be better, not individually but collectively, just as public dinners to which many contribute are better than those supplied at one man's cost. For where there are many, each individual, it may be argued, has some portion of virtue and wisdom. When they have come together, just as the multitude becomes a single man with many feet and many hands and many senses, so also it becomes one personality as regards the moral and intellectual faculties." But Aristotle didn't think that if you put enough random folks together that they'll magically arrive at virtuous political principles. Society needs to create the conditions for this kind of rational deliberation through a focus on education. And this is distinct from a free-for-all social platform where the likes matter more than expertise. And now one could argue that digital media creates great educational content, but we need to remember that it's on the same platform as conspiratorial and really ideologically motivated content. We first need to create rational citizens through investing in robust systems of education. And not to be weird, but in America, we don't pay teachers a lot and schools are falling apart, and you can now show PragerU videos in classrooms in a number of states. Now, education isn't the only prerequisite for democratic deliberation, because we also need a place to deliberate. The examples we get in Greek philosophy involve things like symposiums where people take turns giving speeches and responding, or the Peripatetic school where folks could just walk around and chat about big ideas. And while they were exploring these ideas, they didn't have to navigate around ads for the OnlyFans creator cooking show or Liver King products or promoted posts by fringe political figures. And no one was rewarded financially by arguing for the most extreme and inflammatory ideas. Advertising and algorithmic bias were still a few years away. Okay, so as we've seen, clearly Plato was skeptical of democracy. But like Aristotle, he held discourse and deliberation in high regard. But this doesn't necessarily entail the type of free speech that we revere today. While some will translate the Greek term isagoria as freedom of speech, Teresa Bijan explains that the Greek literally means something more like equal speech in public. The verb agorian, from which it derives, shares a root with the word agora, or marketplace, that is a public place where people, including philosophers like Socrates, would gather together and talk. She notes that, in contrast, American legal theorists like longtime Supreme Court Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes used the term, isagoria, in a way that signified the free market, rather than a social space for interacting with fellow citizens. Back in a 1919 dissenting opinion on a Supreme Court case, Holmes wrote a defense of free speech, which feels similar to the type of absolutist free speech we see today. In the case, Abrams v. United States, the court upheld the conviction of anarchists passing out pamphlets as an act of sedition. Now, Holmes disagreed, and to make his point, introduced the concept of the marketplace of ideas, writing that the best test of truth is the power of the thought to get itself accepted in the competition of the market. He also noted that, at any rate, is the theory of our Constitution. It is an experiment, as all life is an experiment. Now, to be clear, Holmes was disagreeing with a decision that set a pretty scary legal precedent. But at the same time, he was still treating free speech as subject to forces of market competition, as opposed to just a conversation that takes place in a public space. Now, in fairness to Holmes, he was writing this a long time before the free market gave us the Cybertruck. But even as the free market grew into something that gave us private prisons and the opioid crisis, many academics, writers, and politicians still saw this as the best way to navigate free speech in a democracy, meaning that the validity of our ideas should be governed by the same system that rewards fake Jordan Peterson tweets on Twitter, or ladies dancing with their pet stick bug on TikTok. And of course, really bad business advice right here on YouTube. And here, it's worth asking, do we really want to trust the free market model, which gave us over 1,000 Outback Steakhouses in 23 countries, to determine the best ethical, cultural, and political ideas? Well, social media, if it were a person, might say absolutely yes. But this is a system that creates the illusion that an idea is worthy of debate simply because it has high engagement. And often the wildest ideas have the biggest reach, which is great for those sharing these ideas, as sharing wild takes has become profitable. And this is, the case across social media, but it seems like Twitter is an especially crass example, because when you have a verified account, you're paid for engagement, which makes it way more likely that you're just gonna say controversial stuff to get money. Social media also tends to reinforce our existing beliefs, something we've hit on in a few recent videos, rather than inviting open and curious discussion, with the monetizable element only exacerbating the situation, as controversy is worth a lot more than careful discussion. This is not the type of public square that Aristotle imagined, as here we are specifically inundated with information not on the basis of its truth, but on the basis of its ability to create data and sell us advertising, which it does by serving us confirmation that our existing ideas are the best ones. Using social media as a democratic space to explore free speech is sort of like trying to have safe sex using a fishnet stocking. It's simply not what it's designed for. Now, according to Max Fisher, social media is designed to produce perverse incentives that hijack our minds. He notes that Napster founder Sean Parker believed Facebook was built on the social validation feedback, which encouraged people to produce content by positively reinforcing posting with likes. He called it exactly the type of thing that a hacker like myself would come up with, because you're exploiting a vulnerability in human psychology. Fisher notes that product consultant Nir Eyal uses the metaphor of slot machines when explaining the design behind social media. Through a sort of Pavlovian conditioning, we're taught to post specific types of content as gambles for likes. Now, let me know the wildest thing that you ever posted when gambling for likes. And this is why refreshing our feeds constantly is like pulling the lever on a slot machine, right? Because we're hoping that our posts are getting affirmed via likes and shares, or drumming up debate in the replies. My God, does it feel good. This compulsive drive for psychological satisfaction, driven by market forces that prioritize profit above all else, shares few similarities with participating in discourse in the ideal town square. When our primary spaces of communication have profit as their ultimate aim, well then genuine discourse takes a back seat, or better yet, it's just getting dragged behind the car. And while Musk loves to act tough, throwing his middle fingers up to advertisers, which is a thing he really did.
Blackmail me with advertising? Blackmail me with money? Go f yourself.
He's failed to bring about the new paradigm of free speech that he promised us. If anything, it feels like we're getting further away from those ideals. And it's no surprise that a lot of pretty anti-democratic and even straight up fascist tendencies have emerged more prominently on Twitter. A study by a group of USC computer scientists showed that within the first 6 months of Musk's reign, hate speech has flourished under his low to no moderation era. Now, as Aristotle suggests, democracy might be a virtuous system, but it cannot flourish without the right environment. Free speech and deliberation necessitate a world where citizens are educated in critical thinking and political theory, and in which they have space to gather and explore these ideas collectively. But today, a commitment to free speech often looks like having to navigate through hate speech and porn bots just to get out your hot take on the new season of Invincible. And we end up with what Plato was worried about: a system in which the space of deliberation has been badly polluted by those seeking attention and power. And those focused on wisdom and justice are drowned out, or, poisoned with the proverbial hemlock. So maybe rather than blindly proclaiming that free speech and online spaces grounded in free speech are the answer to all our problems, we should instead figure out how to build a society where healthy speech, grounded in careful education and deliberation, can thrive. And if our current model is any indicator, it seems like this new one might be better off happening in the offline world. Because if this doesn't change, we're gonna be stuck in a world of rampant disinformation, which we dug into in this recent video, so please go check that out if you haven't. But thank you so much again for watching. It means a lot to us. We'd love to hear what you guys think, so leave comments and we can keep talking about this. If you haven't heard about it, we have a Patreon community. Thanks so much to all our patrons. There's a link in the description, and over there we got a lot of features. You can get videos with no ads. There's extra video and audio content. I'm maybe gonna start a little book group up there soon, so check that out. And if you're, strapped for cash, which, who among us is not these days, we have a level where you can just give us $1 a month, and it does so much for us because we're really trying to be less dependent on these weird social media spaces and advertising algorithms that we talked about in this video. So, I guess what I'll say finally is Patreon in bio, and I'll see you guys next time.